very annoying. I love him so much. He's a great cat, but he gets real needy and everything whenever I'm like doing a Zoom call in here or a YouTube a podcast, whatever. He starts coming here just whining and crying, and it's just, hey folks, God, we're live right now. I'm live with a friend from my childhood, Sage. His brother Trevor was like the second or third guest we had on here, I think, pretty early on. And you watched that, if I remember correctly. I remember you getting a message about that. How'd you think that went?
Man, I thought it went really well. I really enjoyed the conversation. I thought it was well thought out. I really enjoy hearing people who are intelligent and talking through difficult issues. And I love stories anyway. Storytelling is one of my favorite pastimes. Love to tell stories. So getting to hear Trevor's story from a slightly different perspective. Him and I don't get to hang out nearly as often as we like. So getting to hear him unfiltered for a while was pretty good. It was great. I did enjoy hearing that I brought a very important part to your life of frying turkeys.
Okay. So. I forgot I mentioned it during that show because right before I sat down, I was like, oh, I've got to tell Sage about how he taught me how to. So several Thanksgivings ago, like 10 or 12, it must have been by now.
I think at least 10,
Yeah, I was in Missouri and I went to Sage's house and Trevor was there, Sage's family, and you had actually baked a turkey and you fried one. Because I remember there was a lot of people, so I had 2 turkeys, and it was raining that day. And so like we fried the turkey on the porch, just kind of huddled around like this porch or whatever. And that was life-changing for me. I'm not joking. Like every Thanksgiving, Christmas since then, other than maybe 2 or 3, I'm like, hey, move aside. I got the turkey. Let's do this because it's just infinitely superior to fried turkey.
Oh, absolutely.
Hold on, my phone's going to give me a second. I'm a fucking amateur over here.
Yeah, no worries.
Yes, everyone, this is my first time doing it. And of course, my headphones are fucked up. This is so embarrassing. This is it had to be on a live too.
Of course. So funny story about that turkey, man. The first time that I had actually fried a turkey was not long before that.
Oh my God.
We had a gentleman that I became really good friends with. He did a lot of inner city work. And he
Sage, I'm gonna start this over. I'm sorry. My audio is fucked up. I don't I don't want to do that because then well, I can't hear through this computer either, which I should be able to. All right, give me 1 second here. Sounds. Sing me a love song. Drop me a line. Okay, output should be on. Can you say something, Sage?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Oh, perfect. There we go.
Nice.
All right.
I was starting to panic. Maybe it was on my end.
Correct. No, so this happens to me. So sometimes whenever I pop my headphones out and I plug them back in, the sound just dies. And I don't know why. I see the little meter going down on the screen, and when I push it up, it doesn't come back on. But I just restarted. But anyway, thank you for joining us, Sage. I really appreciate it. I like to have these opportunities to just get back and talk to folks from the old days. And you mentioned storytelling. I love storytelling too. I don't think it's just because I enjoy telling stories. I like listening to them, and I think everyone does. I remember seeing this thing years ago about how there's like I forgot how they figured this out, but just something the way that our brains are shaped and how they're slightly different than Neanderthal brains. And the conclusion that they kind of surmised from this was that the part of your brain that processes storytelling seems to be a lot larger in ours than it was with Neanderthals. And so bringing people together, or storytelling is a great way to bring people together, and it encourages cooperation. Of course, it's all, hypothesis. No one can actually go back and check. But I was always amazed when I ran across bad history teachers because it's like, bro, all you're doing is telling stories. Like, that's it. Right. It's like 90. How can you fuck that up? Like, people love from like cradle to grave. People love stories. How do you mess that up? I don't understand.
Go teach math or something. But like,
yeah. Get your nerd ass out of here. Because it's like any douchebag can get up there and just like recite facts. The Magna Carta was signed in 1215 and Runnymede, England by King. No, tell me what happened. Yeah. What were they doing there? What happened from that? It's just, I don't know. It's odd to me when people can't do this or at least put in a good solid effort.
That's one of the reasons I ended up disliking a lot of the education that I received, is because it was just regurgitation of facts. And when I actually got introduced to something called classical education, it's one of the things I really liked about it, is that it told history in a chronological manner, and it did it in story form, which is beautiful. If you've ever read The Story of the World, if you ever get a chance to look it up, it's a beautiful novel type series of history, and it's really good. So.
Yeah, it's I don't know. It is the best way to learn it, and I'm glad you brought that up, because I thought of this right before we started. I didn't include it in the questions I sent over, but I'm not sure how your education went. Like, what was your path in education? Because you didn't attend Maranatha. I don't remember you doing that. But so were you homeschooled, or I'll let you have the floor. How did that go?
Yeah. So our family, and I don't know, I can't remember how much Trevor talked about this, but we moved a lot early on. Mm-hmm. My dad was an entrepreneur. And so I was actually born in Washington State, and my parents were hippies. You probably knew that from my name, Sage Sunrise Acorn.
I love your name. I love your name so much.
They grew out of that. Obviously, Trevor and Tyler did not get that legacy like I did. But yeah, so I was born in Washington State. They lived in a little hippie commune in Port Townsend, Washington. It's actually still there. So if you go back, there's still people that kind of live there and,
oh, wow,
sell crystals and whatnot.
Yeah.
You can talk to them, whatever. But so, yeah, so we, at about age 5, moved to Wyoming, which is where my grandparents, my mother's parents live. Primarily because my grandpa was a contractor, and so my dad worked for him. And at that time, was going to public school. So those first through third grade, went to public school in Cheyenne, Wyoming. And then my parents became Christians at different times, but later in life. So my mom, I was 2 years old when she became a Christian, and then my dad I was 6 when he did. And so I got to kind of see some of their like growth. And part of that was they decided that they wanted to educate us different. And so it was, again, about third grade year, right after third grade year, they pulled me out of public school and put me into a school probably very similar to Maranatha, where you and Trevor went. It was a independent fundamental Baptist. It was a PACE school. Which I don't know ACE. Yeah. You sit in little cubicles and you put a flag up on the thing when you want to have a question. And the crazy thing was they let you grade your own work. And I cheated my way through fractions, and it haunts me to this day because I never learned fractions. Because
I can't believe that happened. I can't.
Math sucked for me forever. So anyway, did that for, to be honest with you, I don't know if it was a year or 2. And then my mom decided to start her own school. And I think it came out of the desire to homeschool us. And this is in the 80s. So like, this was not a mainstream movement at the time. Mm-hmm. There were some people doing it, but it definitely was not like now, where there's a large group of homeschooling people in almost any city you live in. And so when she started talking to friends and neighbors, they actually said, "Hey, would you homeschool my kids too?" And she's like, "Well, it doesn't really work that way, but sure." And so she actually converted our garage into a small school and had 8 students the first year. And she actually followed what's called a cottage school method, which is like the one-room schoolhouse, because she was one teacher. So the premise is you teach the older kids in such a way that they can teach the younger kids.
Interesting.
In other words, if you learn it well enough, master it well enough to be able to teach somebody else, that's how you know you've actually learned something. And then obviously the teacher oversees all that and makes sure it's being communicated and all kinds of stuff. So that was an interesting proposition. I've always been an arguer and a talker. And so I was actually kicked out of her school in, I think, 6th grade.
Wait, you were kicked out of your mom's homeschool?
Yeah. She was like,
"What did you do?"
Like, I constantly was arguing, constantly talking, constantly. And it was like, not like an anger thing. She was just like, "Listen, I can't teach all these other kids and keep you like under."
Oh, that's great. That's great.
So she put me in Catholic school in 7th grade. So 7th grade, went to Catholic school, got kicked out of there. Because same thing, I love to argue and debate, and it blew my mind that they had sex education in a Catholic school, and I was like arguing with these nuns, like, how could you possibly teach on the subject? And then also in my young days of debate and things, I found out that they were teaching evolution. And so I was like, how could you do this? You're supposed to be Christians or whatever. And so anyway, they asked me not to come back. And so worked out okay. My parents were deciding to move from Wyoming to Missouri at that time, which is a whole nother crazy story. Trevor was pretty young, so he may not remember this. My dad's always been an entrepreneur. And we had this house that we absolutely loved. We had these neighbors that are still friends of ours today, loosely. Best man at my wedding. Trevor had a very close friend. This family was a really cool family. If you ever want to interview someone very interesting with a crazy life story, any one of the boys that grew up in that family. Anyway, they built a homemade base. We had the typical like 80s growing up. So like we got up before the sun on Saturdays, rode our bikes all day long, didn't come back till the lights came on, played baseball in their yard every day, blah, blah, blah. My dad decided to pursue asbestos abatement, and he was pursuing contracts all over the country and started getting more and more in Missouri. And just one day, without telling my mom, put our house on the market because he figured it would take a while and he'd have time to, she had started the school, and the school was flourishing and starting to grow. And they got an offer that day.
Oh, geez.
And he had to come home and be like, so we have to move in 30 days. And she had no idea. My mom's took it like a champ. Like,
yeah. I don't
remember them fighting or even arguing about it. So we moved to Missouri. We moved to a small town called Devil's Elbow, which is how we ended up meeting you guys. My mom homeschooled me for another, I think, while you guys were at Maranatha. This time of my life is kind of fuzzy to me. I think homeschooling. And then we moved to Lake of the Ozarks. And so when we moved to Lake of the Ozarks, I went to, wait, am I getting this backwards? We went back and forth.
You guys were in Devil's Elbow, like when I graduated high school. You were
okay. No, backwards. Sorry, we went to Lake of the Ozarks first, and they homeschooled. Trevor and Tyler homeschooled, my two younger brothers. I went to my sophomore year of high school, started at a small Christian school at Lake of the Ozarks. It's very similar to Maranatha. I think one of the big differences would be it was a church that housed a school just like Maranatha did. The difference was, I think there, and I don't know what your experience was, I fairly respected Keith Carnahan.
Mm-hmm.
He was always kind and generous to me. I did not respect any of the school administrators at your school, even though I didn't go there. Like the Raglins.
Interesting. What did they do to you?
I just did not like the way they treated. You may not even remember this.
I remember. Oh my God. I have nothing but bad things to say about Mr. Ragland, our principal. Okay. Nothing. I never had any confidence in him, and I didn't like that he was purposefully cruel. That was just his thing. There was this I don't know if Trevor brought this up or if he was because Trevor started attending our school when we were in 10th grade. He was in 10th grade, I think. Mm-hmm. And whenever he would teach these classes, if you raised your hand to ask a question, his favorite thing to say was, put your hands down. When your hand goes up, your brain shuts off. He would say that all the time when kids would raise their right. Why would you say that? And I never understood why anyone would flex the fact that these 13-year-olds were scared of them. I never got that. To this day, I don't I'm roughly his age now that he was when I went to school there. I was like, man, I can't imagine being like that. So yeah, I get it. I get why you thought that.
So there was that. And then I don't know if you remember Damien was a kid.
Oh yeah, Damien. I remember him. He was only there for 1 or 2 years. I
went on a trip to go bowling or something with you guys. I was kind of like a chaperone. I was driving the van, and I don't know if you were there. I can't remember if you were there. I know Matt was. But there was an interaction when he got off the bus where the kids were talking basically about how we shouldn't associate ourselves with people like Damien. And I remember being so appalled by that because it seemed the antithesis is what I believed Christianity was supposed to be. And they were telling me where they got that from. Mr. Ragland tells us that Proverbs says that you shouldn't, those who find their counsel with fools will find themselves.
Oh my God. I remember that. I don't know if I was there for that, but I remember Matt saying something about that very same thing. Because when you said that, I was like, oh, is this when Matt talked about he who has wise counsel or something like that? Yeah, I remember.
So that's in Psalms. There's another one that says I got them mixed up, but it's the companion of fools will quickly be destroyed. And so they're basically saying that he's obviously a fool. He uses bad language sometimes, doesn't listen to good music, and so therefore we should not associate with him. And I thought that was horrible. So anyway, my experience was different. So the church we went to, I had no respect for the preacher or most of the leadership there, but the school administrator was amazing. Still a man I look up to this day. His name's Mr. Crutchfield. Very, very influential in my life. Showed me a lot of grace when I didn't deserve it in my life. And so I went to there from sophomore year through senior year, and then graduated, and then took actually almost 2 years off to work in what I thought was an inner city troubled youth program. Ended up being a cult. Family started getting involved in at that time, a very prominent cult, and spent almost 2 years there. Was kicked out of there, and then went to Pensacola Christian College, which is, if you may have heard of that. Remember that?
Oh yeah, I'm familiar.
Very similar, like Bob Jones University, same ilk, King James only. That's actually where a Becca school curriculum is made.
Yep.
So anyway, went there for a couple years, got kicked out of there.
I was gonna say, there's no way you lasted at Pensacola. Like, with your track record, I'm looking at here: homeschool, Catholic school, cult. I mean, come on, there's no way you lasted at Pensacola.
So I was actually married. So I got married my sophomore year of college, and got asked not to come back in a nice way. So we moved back to Missouri and actually finished out my education at Southwest Baptist University in Missouri. So that's my kind of educational background. All
right. So, wow, there's a lot to go over here. There's so much. I may not even get to everything I wanted to, but the first thing I want to talk about is how you mentioned that you've always been an arguer. And I think all of us kind of were, or a lot of us were, that maybe it was just like the environment that we grew up in, or maybe we were born that way. Who knows? But I was going to say, Trevor and I mentioned you briefly during the last one. And he asked if I'd ever talked to you. And so on occasion, we'll send messages and stuff. And I said, I think I said it in the meeting or that I with Trevor. I was like, I've actually never had a bad interaction with Sage, which I like that, because I've had plenty of bad interaction with other people, and you're evidence that it's not me. Just like I thought, it wasn't me. I know it's the other people, because like if I'm getting along with Sage, all right, no matter like what we talk about, then I know that I'm not fucking up here. And another one, say what?
I appreciate that. That's words.
And another one you mentioned, I laughed a lot when you talked about how you were chastising the nuns for their curriculum and everything like that. When I was in fourth grade, I was still in public school. In fact, I was in Germany. Yeah, I was in Germany. And I remember we had a science lesson, and we were talking about the solar system. And the teacher was talking about the sun and, how was the sun formed? And I remember saying, because God did it. And she's like, well, there's why. I was like, no, that's the answer. And I was such a dick about it. Like I wasn't kicked out, but I remember, like, I still remember that to this day. And my teacher's like, look, okay, I got it. God did it, but we got to go over the lesson here. But I was adamant on that. So yeah, I get it. Also, I'm not letting you get away from this conversation without at least explaining two of these places you got kicked out of. Because you just kind of like, I guess you're with your mom, but the more interesting one are the cult and Pensacola. What did you do to get kicked out of there? I've got to know.
So yeah, the Pensacola one's very ironic. So I'll get to the other one first. So one quick other anecdote or story. When I was at the first independent fundamental school that I went to in fourth grade, I was so into arguing and debating because we were actually charismatic at the time. So we believed in like speaking in tongues and weird things like that. So my mom and I actually created a Baptist battling Bible that had a note card in the front. I still have it. So if you ever want to see it,
that's so cool. That's so cool.
It's got all the verses in it outlined in the front. So I could just open it up and reference them about all those things so that I could try to trounce my teachers in fourth and fifth grade on these subjects. So I wouldn't have lasted long there either had I stayed longer. So the cult, what happened there was it was a very obviously extremely rigid, extremely legalistic situation. And also my future wife at the time was there, and they had very, very, very strict rules about interaction between girls and boys, men and women. Part of that was pragmatic. There were 200 teenagers and only about 8 adults in this whole place.
What is this cult? Like, what is what?
If you Googled Bill Gothard or IBLP, or if you've seen Shiny Happy People on Prime.
Okay, I got to pause real quick here. So I didn't know that was a Bill Gothard thing, because I'd heard of Bill Gothard. Like, maybe it was from you guys. I don't know. I remember hearing. No, it wasn't. It was about music, because I think in our music class we followed Bill Gothard's book. That's
the
probably where
syncopated beat and the rock music. Demonic and comes out. Yeah, that's all from him. Yeah.
And ever since I started doing this, I have a lot of people that I've been talking to I'd never heard the acronym IBLP before. I'd never heard it, but I've heard it multiple times since I started doing this. And a friend of mine recommended to me to watch Shiny Happy People.
Mhm.
And I watched the first 2 episodes the other day before I did my interview with her. And I learned a lot more than I had. I didn't know that was the cult you guys were in. That's interesting, huh?
Yeah, so the show goes a lot deeper. I was a little frustrated towards the end of it because it focused solely on kind of like the negative survivors, which it'd be kind of interesting to hear people's perspective, like myself or my wife even, who came out undeterred from their faith. But regardless, it's a fairly accurate. It starts with the Duggars, the 23 and Counting or 20 and Counting, whatever that show was called, because they were kind of they became kind of the poster children for that place. But it really found its height in the 60s and 70s. And I mean, he was packing out stadiums. I mean, when we went to several of the national conventions that they did, they had a youth choir, and it was a 6,000 voice youth choir.
Whoa.
Yeah. So, I mean, it was incredible. It packed out stadiums, like I said, and that was towards the end of the heyday. So that wasn't even at its peak. So, I mean, he I don't know how much time you want to spend on the cult, but they
go for it. Yeah, this is we're talking about it more and more in other episodes.
So he actually, Bill Gothard, for all his failures, I mean, the dude was obviously a cult leader, not in a good way, if there is a good way.
I was about to say, is there?
No, probably not a good way. He actually convinced world governments to give him access to properties and to the legal system. So Russia, actually, I don't know if it was Russia, the state, or Russia, a city within Russia, but they would actually turn over orphanages to him and his, quote, ministry. My wife actually went over there and worked in one for 6 months with her whole family. Indianapolis in Indiana, the court system would court assign youth. They'd give them a decision to make between going to juvie or going to his program. Oklahoma had what's called a Character First program that he developed and got put in the public schools. The dude was hugely influential. Arkansas, they created these cabins out in the woods, and this is bizarre, by the way. This tells you how little government looks into things. I actually worked at one of these. Court assigned youth would be sent out into the woods with teenagers to live in cabin with no adult supervision.
Incredible.
Months at a time.
It's kind of like what you're talking about is kind of similar to what happened to Josh Duggar. They sent him to like a youth camp to do activities where, I don't know, building houses would help cure your sin or something. And so that's kind of, I do got to say this before you can continue, is that one thing you have to really respect about cult leaders is the audacity. Holy shit. Like I don't think I could ever find the balls to even propose something so absurd. And I guess if you do it enough times, someone's going to say yes. I guess it's just a numbers game with these guys. It's incredible.
He built this clout in the 60s. So IBLP stands for the Institute of Basic Life Principles. This idea that he had is that there are unchangeable tenets or principles in the world that we have to live by. And when we live by those, life turns out better. He also had this little song for kids called the 10 Unchangeables. So there's things about, and some of this is true, right? There's always
I'm about to say it's not completely false. Yeah.
Right. Of course. Yeah. And that's, but the big response came in the response to the sexual revolution in the 60s and the hippie movement. And so parents are seeing their kids all of a sudden, quote, go off the rails, right?
Yeah.
You do drugs, not wearing bras anymore. I mean, it's going crazy. And so he brought in what he told them was like, hey, if you follow these principles that I'm going to give you, and your family will be okay. Your kids will not go astray.
Yeah.
And so I think this still happens all the time in churches and other organizations where that's kind of the promise that you're hooked with is, send your kid to our youth group or come to our church and your marriage will, you're having trouble with your marriage, we'll fix it. Will get better, whatever. And so it blew up as a response to that, I think. And so I think cities, governments, all that started wanting the same kind of outcome. So several cities gave buildings, or not individuals within those cities. So where we were at in Indianapolis, there was a hotel given to them that we lived in. It was a 13-story, I think it was an old Sheraton hotel in downtown. I mean, prime property.
Incredible.
Given to him. Yeah.
Hey, sorry, was Jack Hyles part of this movement?
No. Okay. No. He's a loon as well, but I mean, in that same See, there's going to be several names like you and I are aware of. Like so many people, like
That's true. Yeah,
Google that.
I just remember he was in Indianapolis. I thought he was in Indianapolis. Jack House.
He may have been. He may have been. That was the very like strict independent fundamental Baptist.
Okay, all right.
Bill Gothard was non-denominational, and so there were people from every denominational background in this group. And so so we had large groups of court assigned youth that we worked with there. And so you asked me how I got kicked out. So I was getting
gotta know. Although it's a lot less. It is a bad cult. I'm not trying to downplay the dangerous part of IBLP, but there are worse ones. So
we weren't drinking Kool-Aid or anything like that.
Drinking Kool-Aid.
To be fair, it wasn't a deadly cult in that sense. There was a lot of abuse and scandal that came out of it. Google Bill Gothard. There's been, I think, 40 different women who have come forward with lawsuits against him in the last couple of years. Couple of them being very close friends of my wife and I. And we knew, like, when you live there, like, there's so many weird things that if we were to step back now, you'd be like, of course. That you just at the moment were like, oh, it's just Bill Gothard. That's how he rolls.
Yeah.
So they had these very strict rules about dating. They didn't believe in dating. Dating was a worldly thing. So they believed in courtship. I don't know if you remember. Called I Kissed Dating Goodbye.
Yes, I Kissed Dating Goodbye guy. Yeah, there was a book. He had like a hat and everything.
Yeah. So it was very popular. That wasn't actually Bill Gothard, but it was the same kind of principle.
Mm-hmm.
It was like one step short of like betrothal, like your parents picking your mate for you. However, in IBLP, there was a strain of that too. People who taught betrothal. So anyway, when I was there, I was already had a huge crush on my future wife. She happened to work there. When I was there, we were kind of like secretly kind of talking to each other. And I was actually
scandalous.
Oh, I know. We held hands one time when I was looking.
My God.
Yeah, dude, you have no idea. It was awful. So the guilt, I live with that to this day. But the interesting thing was I was at that time in my life was really trying to do what I thought was the best thing. Like, I'd gone through a pretty horrific high school relationship with a girl, and it didn't turn out good. I was bummed about that, bummed about what happened there with our because our families were all real close. And so I was determined to do the right thing with my future wife. And so I was like, I'm going to do this courtship thing. I'm going to reach out to her dad, ask for permission, do all that stuff. Well, the idea of anyone while they're working, they're having a romantic entanglement of any sort, even though I wasn't even talking to her about it, or just kind of talking about it, they kicked me out for that reason.
Really? Wow.
Entertaining the idea of getting married someday. They wanted the sole attention of the people that work there on what they were doing and not having any kind of
holy shit
sex, kind of attractions or anything else. Like you weren't, very similar to some the stuff you talk about, like different elevators. You didn't, you lived on different floors. I mean, it was anyway. Some of that was practical. I mean, you got like 200 teenagers and like 8 adults.
I'm surprised they even had. I mean, if it's that strict, I'm surprised they even had men and women in the same like building or like work area. You'd think they just separated completely at that point, or unless I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it was the only building that was donated to them. So
it's like necessity.
Right. So there's that. I mean, it was rigid, and when like there was very few opportunities to like sneak off and do something. It was run like the military. It was very strict. Well, and this is crazy. And you talk about cult leaders can get stuff done. This hotel was in disarray, and with a group of teenagers, completely remodeled this entire hotel. Ran an extensive outreach program all over the entire city of Indianapolis. They held conferences for judges, mayors, and government leaders there every month, and we led the whole thing. We worked the kitchen for hundreds of people, and it was slave labor too. Like we paid to be there.
You're right. It's like and you gladly did it. You're like, oh yes, this is right.
Absolutely. Which is just absolutely bonkers. But so anyway, so that's what they asked me to leave. They said, obviously your mind's not here, so you need to leave. So
that's amazing. That is amazing. Like they had you working for free, gladly working for free. They didn't have to force you to do this, and they're like, yeah, but you got human emotions. Sorry, can't do. That can never work here. Sorry, pal.
And it was more like I was acting on them. Like it was so it's even crazier than that. Like they had these workbooks that we went through seminars like constantly. And I had written her name next to the idea of courtship, and I can't remember what I put, like someday talk to her dad, something like that. And one of the leaders found that, and that was the premise on which they kicked me out. So,
wild. That shit is wild. Wow. All right. Okay. Wow. That is insanity. All right. How about Pensacola then? By this time, you're already married, and Pensacola wasn't that. So
no. It's still pretty strict. I mean, you hear stories of like pink and blue sidewalks and different elevators. They weren't actually that strict. They did have very strict, like when you left campus, we're in Florida. They had 2 different beaches.
Yes, I heard about that.
Which I also thought was ironic too, because like you're going to the beach with a bunch of people who don't go to your college, watching them walk around in swimsuits.
Listen,
you can't be around the women in your own college.
I remember thinking that when people told me about the different, I didn't know it was like different beach. I thought there were different beach times, but same thing. But I was like, okay, but it's not a private beach. You'll be there with other people. Right. The pink and blue sidewalks thing, that's actually a thing at Bob Jones. They're not actually pink and blue. Yeah. So I had, I do another show that I just started, and I don't know if you remember these 2. Kayla Childress is one of them. Like, I don't remember her. She's like 8 years younger than me. But we went to Maranatha. She remembered me because she was friends with Essence, my sister, for those who don't know. But and then there's another girl named Kai. But we do the show, and they've been to Bob Jones, and they have different sidewalks for men and women. And I was like, I listen, I don't agree with the whole, men, boys and girls, other side of the bus, but geez, different sidewalks. Like, what are you afraid of? They're walking out in public on a sidewalk. Like, what? I don't know.
You can get it done on a sidewalk in broad daylight. You have some serious skills.
So. Right. Yeah. Right. So you should be applauded. You shouldn't be kicked out.
100%. 100%. But yeah, so it was very strict, but I've almost flourished in that environment. I grew up in it. I mean, we went to those kind of schools in grades, or in the schools we went to through high school. I was in a cult. So it was actually almost like freedom when I went there. So, and I'm, both places I made lifelong friends. The cult, my best friends came out of that. Part of the almost like trauma bonding. Yeah. For sure. And then Pensacola, made some great friends there. But so long story short, I was actually taking my life very seriously at the point. I was getting married. I got to figure my shit out as far as what I believe, what I want to do, what do I believe about God, what do I believe about all this stuff, and how seriously am I going to take this? And so I actually started a Bible study on campus, and it was like public to anyone who wanted to come. And we ended up having several people come to the Commons area, and blew my mind. It was very successful, and we ended up started one meeting in my apartment off campus, and it was just dudes. This was because girls, that would definitely have been a no-no for girls to come to that, even though my wife lived there. And we had a small child at that time. Cedar was just born. And there was a dude that was coming, and he struggled with alcohol pretty severely. And so we were kind of talking that through with him, like, how do you work on this? How do you go through that, whatever. And I thought it'd be a good thing. We also watched, I don't remember this. Do you remember the Eddie Murphy movie? Oh gosh, which one was it? With the Crumps. Is that the right?
Yeah. Was that like Christmas with a Cry? I don't remember.
Yeah, and it was some goofy movie. Yeah. We watched that one. I was like rated PG-13 or something. So anyway, he left there, bought a bottle of vodka, I think, and drank it on the way home. And on his way home, he threw it out the window, and someone saw him throw that bottle out the window. They confronted him next day, say, "Where were you?" He said, "I was at this Bible study." And, and so they were like, "Well, what do you guys do?" And he's like, "Well, we talked about the Bible, and then we watched a movie." So both of those, that was not okay. So when I got confronted, they asked me, "What are you guys talking about in this Bible study?" And I said, "Well, we're talking about the Bible." And he was like, "Well, we don't allow unsanctioned Bible studies." And I was like, "Well, that's bizarre. And we're at a Christian college." And he says, "Well, we've had trouble in the past of people wandering into Calvinism. And unless there's somebody here that's going to moderate that and keep you guys from doing that, we are not comfortable with you having a Bible study unless someone is there," which I thought, was bizarre. Yeah, super bizarre. And then they found out we watched a movie. They said, "You can't do that." And I was like, "Where does it say we can't watch movies?" And he's like, "Well, you can't go to the theater. That was a rule. And you can't have people come in and watch movies." So I thought I was going to get a slap on the wrist. And they said, "We'd like you to sit out for a semester." And if we're coming, I said, "I can't. I'm married. I got a kid. Like, I got to get this done." Like, So anyway, that was the end of my career there. And
wow. Well, wow, that's kind of surprising. First off, Steve, hey, what's going on? Steve, I don't know if you remember the Ferrises. They went to school. How did you wander into Calvinism? Well, I mean, So pretty, it's I don't know.
It's meant
So
to be.
it's go what? So
It's meant to be.
it's meant to be. You were pretty. I didn't hear that. You're right. Yeah, it's I will say that I remember with the Calvinism thing. I remember. I can't imagine that happening at Maranatha. That was a college I went to, Maranatha, Wisconsin.
Mm-hmm.
They would the drinking would have got you kicked out, definitely. Like if someone's out here drinking, like that would have been a no-no. But watching a movie at someone's house and getting mad at you for having a Bible study is wild. That actually happened to me and Trevor and Matt at for our Bible, that exact same thing almost, where they didn't like the fact that we were having this Bible study before school started. And I remember Pastor Carnian asking about the Calvinism thing, but what was he gonna do? They can't get so right. That there was that big of a deal. That shit is crazy. Oh man, so I guess that goes right into the question I was going to ask you here. Oh yeah, Steve, thank you for the Christmas with the Clumps thing. So that was the movie and trauma bonding. That's right. You mentioned the trauma bond. That is true because Steve had commented that. Absolutely. I mention this all the time that that the experiences you go through, like in like the military or cult activities and stuff like that. You make your strongest friends. At least I have. Like my strongest friends come from the times I was absolutely miserable because all you have is each other, and you see these people all the time. You're with them a year. It feels like 10 years, and so that does happen. And to what Steve said, they don't want you to think for yourselves. I found this out at Maranatha a lot more than anywhere else. That our teachers and like the faculty and the clergy there, they didn't mind us asking questions. They actually encouraged it, as long as you accepted their answer. If you because the second you didn't like their answer, then they had a problem. Then it was like, okay, who do you guys think you are? Did you run across that too?
Oh yeah, I mean all the time, and that's actually started me down the path of really kind of questioning my faith for a while. Was a lot of that pushback that I got from people I respected. One of them was actually at a pretty early on class in Pensacola, and the guy was talking about alcohol and just how clearly it's prohibited in the Bible.
Oh, come on.
And at that time I didn't even drink at all. I was a teetotaler, but I didn't have a personal conviction from the Bible about it. And I remember just like asking the questions. I'm like, this seems to fly in the face of both the Old Testament and the New Testament. Like Jesus' first miracle was making wine. And not only that, it says he made it after they were well drunk, and he made 140 gallons of it. Like this is not a dude that's afraid of alcohol. Old Testament talks about wine all the time. As far as it was even an offering they were supposed to give. It talks about strong drink. Like so there's all these things. I brought those up in the class, and I mean the dude shut it down right away. And like he was really upset that I was asking these questions. And I'm like, we're in college. Like, isn't this what I'm supposed to be doing here? Figuring this stuff out. So Pensacola was not good, other than it really got me to question a lot of the stuff I grew up with, the cult and that both.
Well, like you said, that's what you're supposed to do. I mean, like, why would you want an academic institution in which everyone just does exactly what you say and believes exactly what you tell them? That is not an academic institution. That's an indoctrination. And the alcohol one, so the ones that were, first off, the one that was the most ridiculous to me was, you brought it up earlier, was King James only. I remember it was like 9th grade. It's like, no, get the fuck out of here. This makes no sense. Like, why on earth would a Bible written in ancient languages happen to have the correct, authorized version in a language that didn't exist for another 1,000 years? Like
By a secular king.
Huh?
By a secular king.
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense at all. And so I remember that not making sense. And the alcohol one, I remember arguing about when I was in college. And I was amazed at how alone I was. Like, we went over to like this house of this family after church, all the kids. And it was like me against like 15 people. I said, okay, folks, come on. Are we reading the same Bible? There's no way that you can't figure out what it.
Most of it comes, obviously, like they're taking something that's just been handed to them and they respect that person, so they just regurgitate it. Second of all, I've noticed that in those circles, especially, almost all of the argumentation leaves logic and enters emotion. Well, I have an uncle who was a drunk and he beat people, and look at all the people who have died because of alcohol, whatever. And I'm like, that has no bearing on the argument we're having. We're talking about whether or not it's biblical in these circles, not whether or not it's good for human flourishing. That's a totally different conversation completely. But it's not about prohibition as far as God wanting us to do it or not.
Yeah. And a lot of times, like, it's like you said, it's not based on logic anyway. And so when you bring the logic into it, you're just insulting them and their morality. And I don't know, it was kind of frustrating. So that was one of the questions I had. Like, when did you first start questioning your faith? where did that take you? Or like in your religious beliefs from that time?
So it's interesting. I was thinking about this after I heard your interview with Trevor,
Mhm.
because obviously our paths went two different ways. My younger brother Tyler took a very similar path, and to yours and
I was
Trevor's.
gonna say to whom? Okay.
Yeah.
But I love
Uh,
finding this out. I love finding out where we all ended up because
yes.
it's pretty scattershot. Like it's everywhere.
Oh,
I love it's a story. It's
yeah. I think there's a couple things that might play into how that happens, and I could be completely wrong. It's just anecdotal for me. My questioning, or kind of, and I know the deconstruction word comes with a lot of baggage with it. I think there's like a deconstruction and rebuild idea, and there's a deconstruction to the point of like destruction, almost of like deconstruction, leave that behind.
Yeah.
But that for me, there was a lot of like, I don't want to believe what I believe simply because I've been told it, simply because I'm afraid what my parents would think or what my friends would think. I want to believe it because it's true.
Right.
If I can't get there, then I'm wasting a lot of my time,
True.
a lot of my life on something that really does not matter. And so that's kind of where I started. And so I tried to, and again, we all have confirmation bias. And like, I think this is something everyone has to really weed through themselves of like, why am I interpreting this? Why did I get triggered by what I just read? Is that because it's truly wrong, or is it because I have a confirmation bias against it? And so I tried to do that as best I could, and I really did examine a lot of antithetical things about where I stood, even just internally within the faith, doctrinally, but also outside the faith as far as other religions, and just atheism and secularism and spiritualism. All those things kind of over time, I dealt with those things. And I think, though, because my goal was not necessarily to deconstruct, but to find out what I really, truly could believe.
Mm-hmm.
I think maybe that's why it took me and I could be totally misreading you, but that's kind of why it took me that way. I heard you say something similar though, like you didn't start out trying to disprove.
No,
you were trying to confirm it.
Yeah, very few people do. Very few people do. It's because I'm well, again, people I talk to, I don't know. I haven't done a scientific study on this, but because it comes to a point where you see something like, okay, well, I don't believe that. Well, then what do I believe and why? Sure. And, those days, and that's why it's so important to ask those questions, when you're young, because the older you get, the less likely you are to ask. And you talk about confirmation bias. We all have it. We don't pretend. We like to pretend we don't. We like to pretend that we're above that, but we all suffer from confirmation bias. We all suffer from Dunning-Kruger. We're humans like everybody else. And so, so that it kind of before I asked, you're a preacher, correct? I remember at least you were. I said, because I wasn't sure. I was like, it's been a long time. I don't know anymore.
Yeah. So, and we can talk about how I got there a little while ago or later in the conversation. But yes, for our churches, does something called elder led. So that means we don't have a single guy, which is different than how you and I grew up. They don't think that's good for the church. They don't think that's what the Bible teaches. So we have a plurality of dudes who lead.
You're right.
Skill set.
You're right.
Yeah. And so no one person has the authority to make decisions for that church. And so it was a small church plant, kind of helped start that, not as a pastor, but as a kind of a core member on what would be considered kind of the poor side of Springfield. We felt really called there. And so started there as a very small place. And as it started growing, they needed more help. They loved my desire to teach and all those kind of things, and asked me if I'd consider becoming one of the elders of the church. And thought about it for a little while. It was hard because I had young kids, but finally came to the conclusion that yes, I'll do this for a little while and see how it works. Did that for several years, and then we moved to Texas for a very brief stint. So I stepped down.
Yeah, I remember that.
We joked that we summered in Texas.
Yeah, it was like days. I remember you were in Texas, and then you were back. I was like, whoa.
And then we weren't. Yeah, we actually bought a house and sold it 4 months later. That's a whole nother story, but. Then we came back. We still go to the same church. I'm in the elder candidate process right now of like just examining whether or not I want to get back into that role at the church. But yeah, still very active in our church.
That is, I remember that because you had some ministry you were doing with, I think, foreign exchange students. I remember that was a different time. I think I came. I was maybe it was the same time. I don't know. Maybe
No,
it
same
was.
time.
Same
I
time?
think we had a couple of the international students there when you
Yes.
came over. Yeah.
Yes, and I smoked hookah for the first time.
Yeah. That's one of my
Eye-opening
ministry
experience.
gifts. Yeah.
Going to State's house, it was very, very, very interesting. I did it again later in the Middle East, in the army and everything, but that was some fun stuff. So I guess back to like how you, how would you describe your religious beliefs now? Like what you believe about deities and yeah, I don't even go for it.
I think, I mean, especially for anyone from that's not within Christian circles, or even yourself, I'd be considered. This word comes with a lot of baggage, but a very conservative Christian, but in a very different sense. Like not in the sense of fundamentalism, like what we grew up in, but I do believe the word of God is God's inerrant word for us today. I do believe everything that's in the Apostles' Creed. It's probably the best place to start. Like that'd be the minimum that I would say is the absolute, like what I believe. Like those are the most important things. We can debate and discuss all the other things, and at the end of the day, walk away and say, "Hey, we're still brothers. We still love each other within the circles of Christianity." Apostles' Creed would be one that I would hold pretty tightly to and say that's where I'm at.
It's really like while you were saying that, I kind of forgot how difficult it is to describe to people how incredibly dogmatic our independent upbringing was.
Oh, yeah.
And it is what made a lot of us fighters. It is what made a lot of us, like the Billy Sunday thing.
Oh, yeah.
It kind of did shape us that way, but I try to use it the best I can, like we all did. I mean, we can't get rid of it. And I always say that I'm no longer a religious fundamentalist, but I still think like one in a lot of ways. I still do. Like it's hard to break that mold where I have very black and white thinking. And that's my immediate reaction is to think that way. But then I have to kind of, okay, that's not how the world actually works. And then try to flow through that. But it's difficult to overcome. So even hearing you describe it, I was like, oh, that's true. It actually is hard to say because that is a more healthy way to, and I would say even better way, if we want to, speak subjectively, to look at the whole religion thing. Go ahead.
Yeah, and it took me a while to get there too. I would have started out definitely in that very independent fundamental. Like there was definitely things I rejected out of hand, but I stayed in that for a while. And there was even things in the cult that I gravitated towards because it's so much easier to have black and white answers for something.
Yes,
you can just regurgitate than to actually have to think through nuance, think through how someone else might perceive something and how it needs to be explained and what their perspectives are and should they be taken seriously and cultural impact, all these different things that play into arguments and all these things. And so I'm in a much different place than I am now, but I would still consider myself definitely on the more conservative evangelical side of things.
Stevie said that so it's very hard to let go of to find your own way. Yeah, it's because you're trained to not find your own way. In fact, like they even take like the Bible verses, like train up a child the way he should go, because the way the child should go. Like, there you go. It's already laid out.
He will not depart from it.
And he will not depart. Yeah. It's that is kind of unfortunate. So one question I'd ask was like, what was the most fulfilling aspect of the ministry to you? Because that's something that people it's difficult to talk to people who never experienced like religion or even not just a religion, just God being a very important part of your life. That it's like I always say that when losing my faith was like the worst part of my life. It felt like I lost a limb. It was really painful, and that there were a lot of great highs from that and stuff that I still think very fondly of to this day. And so I wanted to know like how that was going for you and your current path.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. That's a good question. And there were definitely some times where I came very close in struggling with my faith and whether or not I was going to continue following in the faith that I was in, whether or not that meant I completely left it or just left the version of it that I was finding myself in. But as far as fulfilling goes, I mean, there's several different things. As I've gotten older, and by the way, I'm 47 now, so like I'm edging up near 50. But for the first years of my life, I think that comes with age too. Like when I was in my late teens and early 20s, it became about knowing that I knew more than somebody else. So that was what was fulfilling. It's like I had knowledge, the special knowledge that was better than this guy next to me. And so as I matured, that has become so far down on the list, it's not funny. But especially as a pastor, some of the things that have been very hugely fulfilling for us is our work with foreign international students not even just students, but just internationals. We've interacted with hundreds now, maybe, I don't want to say thousands, but definitely hundreds of internationals. And that started when we were at Pensacola. And that's a whole nother, I've got a whole great story there if you have time for it later.
Oh yeah.
But, so that's definitely been a hugely fulfilling thing of like learning other cultures. And it's been awesome to bring my family. For those of you who don't know me, I have 8 kids ranging from age 25 to 20 months, which is a whole nother story. That last one was a big surprise.
I was going to say, what? I didn't even know about this one.
Yeah. I'll give you a teaser. So I had a vasectomy 11 years ago.
Oh,
and
damn.
we have a 20-month-old. Yeah. So, bringing my family and like introducing my children to other cultures, and not just like cultures like people who grew up in America but came from somewhere else, but people who literally just got here from cultures that are vastly different. And we tried to create a culture in our home where they got to speak to our children about who they are, where they're from.
That's cool.
With us, and then vice versa. And so we absolutely love, to this day, that's still one of my favorite things to do and fulfilling. Another thing too is just I try not to use Christianese all the time, but like mercy ministries of like helping people.
Christianese.
It did live in a bubble for so long. Like
you're right.
That like not everyone speaks it, and so. But
did you guard her heart, bro? Did you guard her heart?
Oh yeah, I did. Totally did. But yeah, so mercy ministries is another huge thing for like helping those who are less fortunate, whether that's economically or even just mentally. We had a dude that was homeless and was actually from Turkey. He got scammed and got stuck here. He lived with us for over a year. And that was such a beautiful relationship that we built there. And I tell people all the time, like if your faith doesn't lead you to opening your home to those who are less fortunate, you're in the wrong faith like that, or you don't believe what I believe. James talks about this all the time. And so that was something we took very seriously. And we actually moved to a part of the town. We could have afforded to live in much nicer places, but we moved to a side of town where we could do that on a regular basis with our neighbors, like just live life with people who are less fortunate than we were. And so that's a big thing. I think also the idea of helping, this is more of like in the pastoral role within the church, but helping people figure out what it looks like to restore relationships between kids and parents or marriages or whatever. And that obviously doesn't always work, but like when that does happen, when you can help bridge a relationship, there's hardly anything more fulfilling than that. So those are the top ones.
When you mentioned helping immigrants and everything, I have this vague memory of this documentary I saw of a preacher who like turned his church into like an immigrant center. Did you recommend that? For some reason I linked that with you. Like, did you recommend it or did I can't remember.
I don't know which documentary you're speaking of. There is I don't know if it's a documentary, but definitely several YouTube videos about this family who moved to, I believe, Atlanta, and they started something called Front Porch Ministries. And it's kind of what we got the idea of moving to where we did.
Oh, maybe that was it. Okay.
And kind of basically just your home is where people find refuge, whether it be an abusive situation or kids who don't have a place. One of my favorite stories about where we lived, there was this, oh gosh. So there's like in the summers, it gets pretty warm in Missouri, as you know. And my wife and I are sitting out on the front porch. We're hanging out, and this little African-American kid who lived down the street always would come over, and we couldn't figure out his name. He was 3. We'd ask him his name, and he said Fat Baby. And we're like, what?
He said what?
Fat Baby.
Fat Baby.
That was his name. And he had his like brother's big bike, because he'd ride it like this. So he could hardly reach the pedals. And he loved our house. He would ride his bike over our house, and he'd get there like almost at sunrise in the summers, and he'd stay till dark. We never saw parents, never saw relatives, nothing. It was hanging out with what
3
on our porch. Yeah, 3.
Wow.
He'd come over and he'd sit on our front porch, and he sits there and he looks at my wife and goes, "Hey, Miss Abby." She goes, "Yeah, what?" He goes, "Man, it's hot out here." We said, "Yeah, it's hot out here. I'm getting all sweaty and shit." we just start just laughing. It's like 3-year-old just telling us, he's just all sweaty and shit. So we finally tried to track down his family. Found out he was riding his bike like a half mile, like across traffic, to get to our house. And it was like the situation he was growing up in was obviously not good.
Yeah.
He didn't know what an apple was. We tried to give him an apple. He didn't know what an apple was.
Wow.
Anyway, those were some very. One day he just disappeared. We never saw him again. We assumed they moved, and we never saw him again. But
Yeah, man, it's rough. I wanted to mention something. A couple things you said here. I remember the foreign exchange student. I thought you said that some of them would stay. I remember you mentioning that. And the internationals. That's right. So when I was I worked as a recruiter for a while in the Army, and so there was this program called MAVNI, Military Accessions Vital to National Interest, and basically what it was were people who didn't have green cards. They were here on student visas, and if you were from certain countries and you spoke the home language, the Army could, they'd enlist you in the reserves and everything because you had a valuable asset. And they got rid of the program around 2017 or so, but we still had a lot of the people who had joined, because it took years. Like, it was a long process, with immigration and everything. And I dealt with recruits from India, Cameroon, Nigeria, China, like all over the place. And I love to ask them what they thought about, being in the States, because they grew up, 18 years in their home country, and now they've been here for a year, 18 months or whatever. And of course, the most of them said they miss the food. Of course you would. You miss the food you go from. I'm sure they said that all the time. I wanted to know if this happened to you, though, with the people that you ministered to. A lot of them complained about how sweet the bread was. They said that our bread seemed like it was packed with sugar. I got that complaint all the time. And I remember them saying they were amazed how much cheese was shoved into everything. They said, it's like every time you turn around, they're shoving cheese into something else. And you got this weird can. I knew that from being overseas, that canned cheese isn't really a thing in most of the other parts of the world. But they complained a lot about the bread and too much cheese. What were some complaints you heard?
Oh man, definitely. We heard about food all the time, and it usually had to do with our food is so bland. Like, there was a lot of just not much flavor, not much variety. Yeah. And so we had always, part of what we would do is hey, we're gonna help you with English, but you're gonna feed us, teach us something from your culture.
That's a good trade-off. Yeah, go.
Oh man, it was beautiful trade-off. I didn't hear so much about the bread thing. I did hear about cheese. Actually, I took a trip to Thailand several years ago, and at that time I was a much bigger dude. I was probably about 280 at the time, and I was walking on the streets, and this little old lady just came up to me and started rubbing my belly. And she was so proud. She was so proud to tell me that she had learned a little bit of English. And she said, "You are too fat."
Oh my God.
Her explanation was, she goes, "You eat too much cheese." And so I don't know if she was equating that I'm an American. So that's obviously what led me to where I was in my state of life. But yeah, so I don't know if that's common across all cultures, but yeah.
Look, I was in China for a little bit, a summer, and this actually wasn't. I thought it was just a Chinese thing, the bluntness, and it's not rude, because the culture is just different than ours. Mm-hmm. Small talk is rude in a lot of places, and here it's expected. If you don't do small talk, it's rude. But I remember kids would kids tease each other. Oh, you're fat, whatever. No, it was just very matter of factly. You were too fat. Or adults would come up to other. Yeah, you're kind of fat. I was like, man, that would never happen in the United States. It's incredibly rude. And I don't know about Thailand, but in China, they did a lot of pointing. If you weren't, they never saw people who weren't Chinese. They would point at you from across the street, groups of people. And I remember the first time it happened to me, someone pointed at me, and I kind of turned to catch them, and they just kept looking and kept pointing. No shame in it whatsoever.
No.
So, go ahead.
Oh no, that's absolutely true. Especially, I think Asian students are that way, but then also Saudis are. Very direct, very straightforward. They also have a different concept of time. On time is way early. It's a cultural thing. So if you invite them over for dinner, you expect them 30 minutes to an hour late. No problem.
Yeah, they that's funny.
Most cultures think it's weird that we say thank you all the time. Oh, it's assumed for a lot of them. If they give you something or do something, I find myself saying all the time, "Oh, thank you." Mm-hmm. Open door. Someone brings you the check. Thank you. Someone brings you your food. Thank you. Someone says hi. Oh, thanks. But
yeah,
my Saudi friends would be quit saying that.
Quit saying thank you. Why are you so damn grateful all the time? Just live your life, man. But right. There was the direct thing. I saw that a lot. In you're right, the Middle Eastern area, India, West Africa too. The West Africans I dealt with I mean, it was a battle or something that I worked with. I had to deal with the West Africans. No, but it was there was just there's not a lot of like pleasantries added on stuff. And I assumed maybe it was because it was your second language. And so you're not used to dance. No, that turns out that's just how it is. There's like, oh no, this is how you talk to people. You don't dress it up. We got to get to the point here. There's shit to do. So yeah,
Yep.
it's interesting seeing how that changes. And I was going backward there. I think you said one thing you mentioned about how in your younger days, you were really excited to know that you were the holder of this esoteric knowledge that, you know, I learned something these other people don't know, that these other chumps. I too have grown beyond that. But the thing is, it just keeps happening all the time. Like I can't help it now. Like it's not my fault. And the other thing I wanted to say is this is just random.
That's yours to carry.
Yeah, right. I know, right? Someone's got. I am the chosen one. Someone had to do it. You mentioned that you're 47. It reminded me of something I thought of when I first set this interview up. That one of my earliest memories of you would have been, you must have been around 18 or 19 years old. And I remember, and you were always nice. I never thought there were mean big kids, but you were never like they're cruel, except this one time when you were like casually mean. And you probably didn't even mean to be, but it hurt my feelings a lot. I remember, I don't even know what we were talking about, but we were talking about the difference between people and stuff. And you looked at me, you're like, oh yeah, for example, I can grow facial hair and TJ can't. I was like, oh. I was like, hey, man.
I grew weak facial hair at that time too, so that had to have been a super big diss. Like that would have been horrible. It was so weak.
Well, I mean, look, when you're like, you know, when you're 12, you know, your 18-year-old weak facial hair is like a mountain man compared to what I had. And so yeah, I just
that's awesome.
So yeah. Oh God, I didn't write down what you said. There was another story you had. What was it in reference to? Shit. I'm a bad host. We were talking about immigration, I think, and I can't remember now.
Well, but you stories for days on immigration if you want to.
Well, you said something about someone you worked with, and you said there's a whole other story on that if you have time. And I cast like, oh yeah, absolutely, but I forgot to write down what the story was.
Yeah, that's so when we were in Pensacola, the way we got introduced to internationals was when I was actually in school in Pensacola in our early 20s, very early 20s. It was not that long after 9/11, and we met. Actually, no, this was before 9/11. I'm sorry, before 9/11. We met a couple from Hungary. They were actually across the way from us in our apartment complex. Zero English.
Oh,
and I was so interested to get to know who they were and their life story because they spoke no English. I found this out one day because I heard them out in the hall, and it sounded like a Russian mob movie because Hungarians have that same type of
yeah.
And he looked like a Russian mobster, tracksuit, big gold chain, whole 9 yards. So I go out and I'm like, hey, what's up? I'm Sage. And he just looks at me and said, good morning. I said, oh, that's great. Thanks. It was like evening. And like, that's the only word he knew. This is before the like really before the internet was big. So like we didn't have phones stuff on. So we went and bought a Hungarian English dictionary.
Oh, that's so cool.
And that's how we had conversations with this couple. It was Hunor and Renata were their names. Come to find out, they were brought over by the Russian mafia. Hungary had fallen not that much prior. And there was a big movement to get people out. They were looking to escape because conditions were getting bad in Hungary. And so they, the Russian mafia brought them and 3 other families over. They paid, I think they said $3,000 each to get brought over. And they would set them up with a job, and they would set them up an apartment. And then they had to make monthly payments to the Russian mob to stay there.
Oh,
they had nothing. So anyway, the funny part of the story was one day my wife and I are sitting at home and we're getting ready to put the baby to bed. It's pretty late and we're in Pensacola, Florida. We're not too far from the beach. And we hear this car like comes screaming into the driveway. And we hear this loud like door slamming. We hear sounds like arguing and yelling and screaming all the way into the hallway, burst through their door. And I can hear it's them. And I'm like, man, what in the world? And like 2 minutes later, bang, 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 someone knocks on my door. And I'm like, all right. So I open the door. It's my friend Hunor. Doesn't speak English. And he's like miming to me that he needs something. And I'm like, what? And he's asking for a big knife. And I'm like, I do not want to be an accessory to murder.
Yeah, right.
So I'm playing dumb. So but I'm like, oh, hold on, I'll be right back. So I come back with a big rolling pin, big wood rolling pin. I'm like, hey, is this what you need? Hoping to be like, no. He's like, yeah, sure. Give me that.
That'll work.
And I'm like, oh shit. So he leaves and I'm listening, door shut, and I hear whack, 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 more yelling, whack, whack. And I'm like, oh my God. He comes back with a bloodied rolling pin and a big smile on his face. And he's like, bro, come here. And I'm like, no, God, come here. So finally he talks me into going over there. Dude, they had caught a shark on the beach and had nothing to kill it with. They freaking wrestled this thing in the back seat of the car all the way back to their apartment, got it in, and then beat it to death with a rolling pin. Then I felt really horrible about not having a knife. That poor freaking shark was just like beaten to death with a rolling pin. So it's like a 4-foot shark.
Holy shit. Okay. There's so much going on with the story. All right, first, it was funny when you said they looked like a Russian mobster, and I pictured the tracksuit and everything. And then you said the tracksuit. It was like a cartoon. They're just short of just asking for moose and squirrel, and it would have been perfect, you know. And then the story with the shark, because now I am not like a geography master, but isn't Hungary a landlocked country? Like, have they?
They love fishing. Absolutely loved it.
All right.
That's the first thing they took up when they got here. So he would go fishing.
But he's never seen a shark before, probably. I would guess, unless you I go to the beach from Hungary, you can drive, I guess.
Who knows? Yeah, I have no idea what their background there was. They actually came after 9/11, came to visit us in Missouri. He didn't have a driver's license. They would drive overnight and then rest during the day and then drive at night. And they came visit my parents' place at Devil's Elbow. And they wanted to go fishing so bad. So we took them fishing. They were so disappointed because river fish are nothing like ocean.
Not like ocean fish.
Right. So that makes sense now. He probably was like expecting,
Yeah, exactly.
And, he's catching perch.
Yeah, he wanted swordfish and stingrays and shit. And he's got smallmouth bass or whatever. Yeah. That's pretty great. Oh, man. So one thing I wanted to end with you on, you actually talked about it a little bit, but in the United States, the convergence of religion and politics is incredibly strong, which I find super ironic because I joke about this all the time in how the United States Constitution, flaws and everything, but for the time, it had some pretty progressive ideas, specifically the separation of church and state. It was the first nation founded, with its founding document that church and state are separate. However,
correct me if I'm wrong, and I'm not disagreeing with you. Wasn't the separation of church and state not necessarily in the Constitution, but something that Thomas Jefferson wrote about and explained as being a necessary part of the government?
So it comes from a letter from the Congregationalists against the Baptists, I think, or to Thomas Jefferson, and so they're afraid that the Congregationalists will have too big of an influence in the government. And then Thomas Jefferson says, well, the First Amendment says that Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion, therefore ever creating a wall of separation of church and state. So that was his explanation of the First Amendment. So the term isn't there, but that was Jefferson's, although he didn't write, but anyway. But there's no state church. There's no official church governing body. However, there is one, in England, for example. Like they still have. I talk about this all the time, how they mention the crown doesn't have power. Yes, it does. Yes. One of my favorite examples is the fact that they have, instead of a House of Representatives and a Senate, they have a House of Commons and House of Lords. And the king selects 1/3 of the House of Lords, and the church selects 1/3, and the king's the head of the church. It's like, it's right there. And so, but England is a far more secular nation than the United States. And the same goes for like all the other European powers that still have the church as an official part of the state. So it kind of backfired on us in a weird way. That's separated. It's kind of odd. But I was going to ask about this. So when it comes to the immigration thing, because a lot of people I talk to, like conservative Christians, but it's a wide group, obviously, immigration is a really touchy subject, as in like there's a lot of fear, I would say irrational fear in that. So I was wondering, because I remembered that part of your ministry and how that works with you, if you've ever run across issues with that.
So I'm probably quite a bit different than most not necessarily in my circles, but in maybe mainstream, right now anyway, mainstream Christianity, which is, I think, a very short period in time.
Definitely.
See and mainstream Christianity would be unrecognizable to most people 100 years ago or prior. But all that say, I'm more libertarian leaning in that sense. I don't believe government should have much say in a lot of that. I believe in the free flow of information and people between countries. So I agree with you. I don't think there's anything to be afraid there. I do think there's some pragmatic things to keep in mind. Like, should there be things like checking people's health status, or are they carrying some type of horrible disease, that kind of thing. Are they terrorists, those things, and an orderly way to take care of that. But no rolling pin. But I don't believe, but I believe that as far as from a Christian perspective, my main mindset should not be how do I politically address this, but how do I address this with mercy and kindness towards those who need help.
Yeah. I wish that was more common. I just but I do get why it's hard to separate. I do. It's because if your Christian values are your values, they're going to necessarily kind of bleed into your political ones. It's kind of hard to separate them.
Yeah.
Yeah, like you'd have to actively try and give yourself a good reason to actively try.
So this is kind of where how I've thought about it in the last several years. Like everyone has a worldview, whether that worldview is formed by religion or it's formed by something else. And at some point, if you're going to enter into politics, your worldview clashes with somebody else's, and you're going to be making laws that impact people who may disagree with you.
Mm-hmm.
So whether that's religion or otherwise, so that's why I'm more libertarian leaning. I think the growth of the gospel or growth of Christianity in any country should not be from the top down, from the ground up. And so like the only way I see politics being affected by Christians is just by simple organic. There's a lot of Christians who want their country to reflect more them, but I do not think that should be done from laws. So I don't think that a great example would be like gay marriage. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
I am not a proponent of the government having any laws about that, against or for. I think the government should stay out of marriage completely. It's none of their business.
I do too.
Like, why do they care?
It's very weird. It's very weird. Yes.
I think it's weird for me that Christians get really hyped up about that because, like, do you want the government having any say over how your church implements or does marriage? Like, it's a weird thing. Other than the only reason I think it matters to people now is because there's so many benefits to that the government is.
There's government benefits, yeah.
And so in that sense, I do disagree with discriminating against anyone who is in any kind of contractual relationship, whether it be marriage or some otherwise, to say this group of people gets tax breaks and this person doesn't.
Yeah,
That's not right.
I agree. Now, then again, I've never been married, so maybe I'm the wrong person to talk about it, though. But it's just like, it does seem strange that I get the concept of marriage, like, like for an institution like a church or something like that, or even just a celebration of the fact that you've pledged your life to someone. That's cool, but God, signing like a contract with the state, it's weird. I find that bizarre. Very odd.
I find it bizarre that Christians, I think it's just become so ingrained in that we've grown up with that this is a government institution that Christians should be care about. No, it's a church institution or religious institution, if you will, mostly. And the government should have nothing to do with it.
Yeah, well, it kind of goes into what you were saying that how Christianity is unrecognizable from something it was, even 50 years ago, honestly. Well, maybe that's kind of when it kind of came about, like the version we know of today. But I mean, you go back far enough, you don't have to go back far at all before you're right. It's completely unrecognizable. And a lot of it is culturally driven. And like you grow up from a baby on saying the right thing to do is to grow up, find yourself a nice young lady, sign your name on the document here. And that's true. This is correct. And then it bleeds into your actual faith.
You probably recognize this too, even in your growing up, how ironic it is that the churches we grew up in railed against culture, but then everything they believe is a response to culture.
Everything.
So culture is still forming everything they believe.
Yeah.
It's not even really scripture. It's like they're trying to find scripture verses to back up this cultural response that they have.
Yeah.
Not letting the Bible for them interpret how they should just live their life, regardless of what culture does.
I don't know if Trevor and I talked about it, but the one of the big ones is this weird thing with like the interracial marriage one was like that one is like you have no backup for this at all. This is strictly a cultural thing that they enforced on you when you were a child in the 60s, and you're just kind of rolling with it. But
it blows people's mind when you bring up things like that Aaron, Moses' man in Exodus, had an Egyptian wife or concubine.
Yeah, and Zipporah was I can't remember where. So it was Africa. Yeah, I don't know, but it's like you're right. It's just cultural stuff that they drag onto. And an example that they always said, which ironically was true, but they just took the wrong lesson from it. Do you remember they'd always say that, okay, the church is here and the world is here?
Oh yeah. The sliding scale.
And
we were there where they were 50 years ago.
Yeah, and they're right. They're right, because that's how society works, man. Like that's how it is. Like that's why it was so insane for me. I don't know. Maybe just seeing it as a kid helped out a lot in that you're like, okay, there's a reason that if you go to a church, like an independent Baptist church in 1960, it's going to look a lot more stringent and conservative than one in 1995. But there's a reason for that, because you're chasing culture and not actually chasing what's in the scripture.
They don't follow. The only people that follow that line of logically would be the Mennonites and the Amish.
Yes. Yeah.
Because I want to ask these independent fundamentalist guys, like, hey, you're going to give up air conditioning? How about your car? Like, that's, here we are, got your iPhone, I bet,
Yeah, and it's funny because they would make fun of those folks too. It's like, can you believe them? They don't wear buttons. Like, well, what's up with those guys? It's like, how different is that? You don't go to movie theaters. Like, how wildly like different is
But
that?
at the same time, they would go get as many movies as they could from Blockbuster at the time and watch them at home.
That's why the Pensacola thing weirded me out so much, because I've actually never heard of that. Most people didn't care about what you watched at home. It's just like the testimony of going to the theater was weird. I don't know, but anyway, look, man, thanks so much for coming on. Like, I really appreciate
Anytime.
it.
I talk to you anytime.
Really? Because I'd love to have you on again. Because we
Yeah,
go
please do.
going on different topics and everything. Maybe you and Trevor could like do a big one together. Oh, that'd be so fun. That'd be some fun shit. Like I said, Sage was. I love your name too. It's fine. I was laughing when I wrote down the list. It actually said Sage questions. Like, oh, look at that! Look at that, Sage questions. But he was always kind to me, and a lot of big kids weren't. I don't hold grudges against them, but I do remember. I do remember, and it's kind of unfair because, like you judge people how they were when they were 15. Like I don't want people judging me how I was when I was 15. I was honestly.
Oh, dude.
How anyone put up with me until I was like 30, I don't know. I really don't know. They deserve a medal or something.
Absolutely.
Yeah, good stuff. Good stuff.
Oh, this is awesome, dude. Anytime you want to do it. And sometime if we ever get a chance to talk again, whether here or in person, I would love to delve even further into the things like politics and Christianity. I think those are really important conversations to have today. I would love to give more details about the cult and my wife's family's involvement in that. It was way more in depth.
I'd love that.
That would be great. So anytime.
We just had a comment from Heather. She's the one who brought up IBLP in the last meeting I went to. And I want to say one thing real quick. We talk about politics. So by the time I came to visit you guys for that Thanksgiving, I was already out as at least a leftist, probably an atheist. I think I was out as everything at that point because my cover had been blown. I was kind of a dick about it in a lot of ways. But this weird thing kept happening where I would go to people's houses that I knew, and they would kind of like sit around and wait for me to just start. You're like, God's not real, right? It's like that you didn't do that, but your parents were there. And I remember them kind of like looking, and because I recognized the look. I was like, folks, I'm not going to come to your house and start shit talking your religion. Like, why would I do that?
Like that horrible uncle that shows up at every family meeting to talk about politics.
Well, yeah, because you know what? Because that's what a lot of those folks do. They come over, it's like, oh, you want to know how it really is? Like, let me just relax. But yeah, so yeah, it would be fun. We'll do it again sometime.
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
All right, man. But thanks a lot. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. No, dude, thank you for your time. We'll talk to you later.
Later, man. Bye.
All right, see you, bud.